I am smart, I am intelligent, I'm an A+ student, I can do anything I put my mind to. This affirmation that Emmanual Guillory teaches his students is a mantra that shaped his own life. From a student leader at Texas A&M, whoop, to a respected advocate in Washington, D.C., Emmanuel's journey is anything but ordinary. He's worked on Capitol Hill, championed historically black colleges through the United Negro College Fund, and now represents every college and university in the country through the American Council on Education. And what makes Emmanuel remarkable isn't just his resume, it's how he leads with heart, builds consensus in divided rooms, and shows us the power of listening, empathy, and embracing the gray. If you're ready to rethink leadership, legacy, and how we show up for each other, you're in the right place. Welcome to Building Thinkers. Okay, Emmanuel, will you tell folks your story, a bit of what brought you to the incredible work you're doing now?
Really, it started at Texas A&M University because when I was at Texas A&M, I didn't realize that higher education could be a career choice and field. And I met a gentleman, he was our vice president for student affairs at the time, Dr. Dean Brashani, and I did not realize how pivotal he would become in my life because he had a very charismatic, engaging, and innovative way of empowering student leaders and really allowing us and helping us to see and reach our potential. And I really was motivated by him. He inspired me so much that I literally asked him, how did he get to where he was as a vice president for student affairs? And he had shared with me that he went to Bowling Green State University and got his master's in college student personnel, and that he went on to pursue a career in student affairs administration and went and got his doctorate degree, but then landed at Texas A&M University. And it was at that moment that I said, oh, I can get a degree in this sort of stuff and I can do this for a living. And he was like, yeah, you can do that. That's when I decided that I was going to apply to Bowling Green State University. And he wrote me a recommendation letter. I'm still convinced that had he not have wrote me that recommendation letter, I would not have gotten in. But nonetheless, that program is a very rigorous program. And while you may be admitted into the program, you have to also be selected for an assistantship on campus. So it's a two-pronged approach. So you could get into one, but not get into the other, and then you're not in the program. So, but luckily, I was accepted into an assistantship and I got into the program. And since then, the rest has been history. But when I was in graduate school, I really, this whole idea of advocating for people who don't have a voice, being a voice for those who don't have a voice, that really started to bubble up to the top. And it's always been a part of my DNA. If I go back to even being in high school, I ran for student body vice president, I think. And I was always kind of wanting to be in so many different organizations. And I really cared about the topics and what we were doing. And at Texas A&M, I was in the Student Government Association. And so when I got to Bowling Green State University, I decided, well, I'm going to run for graduate student body president because it was something that I regretted not doing while I was an undergrad at Texas A&M. And at the time when I could have ran for student body president at A&M, people actually were putting up a campaign together for me without me even saying anything about it. But I honestly did not believe in myself at that time. But when I got to grad school, I said, you know what? I need to take a bet on me. And so when I did and I won, it was something I took very seriously. And it's when I really realized that, hey, I'm really motivated to wake up every day and do something to better other people's lives. I'm really motivated to wake up and be at the table to make sure that whatever decisions and policies are being created, that my constituents' interests are heard and that they are fought for. And it meant even more to me that there were doctoral students that voted for me, people who were in their 40s and 50s and 60s that voted for me at the age of 24 to represent them and lead them. So it was something that I definitely didn't take lightly. And I have continued that same energy. I have continued that in my career. So after working in Congress for 10 years, I then went to work for the United Negro College Fund, UNCF, advocating for historically Black colleges and universities, private nonprofits, and their students. And then I went to advocate for the larger private nonprofit sector of higher education and their students. And now I am at the American Council on Education, where I advocate for all of higher education in the United States. I take my job very seriously. So,
I mean, it's so clear, just, the impact and care and leadership. I always felt you possessed just being in your friend group and such care for all in a way that was so tangible and I think positively contagious. And so I'm really grateful that you took a bet on yourself and are driven by this desire for impact and supporting students across the country. I'm curious, when we think about the students and we think about people, what have you learned about people, not just policy, but people from your time in DC and from your time in advocating for people?
well, the greatest thing I've learned is that we all want and desire to be heard, first and foremost. It doesn't have to lead to a complete comprehensive understanding of a person's position and perspective. But the fact that you take the initiative and you create a space for their voice to exist, for their voice to be seen as valuable, and for their voice to be heard goes leaps and bounds when it comes to working with other people, because it's that very thing that we do not do well. And I would want to say that when we engage with other people, we have an implicit bias that exists within our minds. That implicit bias comes from how we were introduced to the world and what we were taught as young kids of how to engage the world. I remember being taught, don't talk to strangers. Don't talk to strangers. Because as a child, you have no idea what the intent is of that person who doesn't know you. And so that's a very easy thing to teach a child, don't talk to strangers because, want to keep you safe, of course. But that very innocent and, important thing to teach a child could foster into, oh, this person is a stranger, meaning I don't know them. They don't look like me. They don't talk like me. They don't act like me. They don't dress like me. They're not from the same zip code. They're not from the same neighborhood. They didn't go to the same school as me. They're not the same socioeconomic status as me. They're not the same race as me. They are a stranger to me. And something as simple and easy, and I'm not saying it's wrong to teach your kids not to talk to strangers, because I believe that you got to protect your children, of course. I'm just giving an example of how something so innocent could potentially in someone's mind grow into something more as they are formulating how to engage the world and having this initial hesitancy when it comes to a quote unquote stranger. Because as you grow into an adult, then you understand, all right, you're going to meet people in class you never know before, at work, of course. But it's that initial hesitation of, wait a minute, you're a stranger. So I'm going to initially be hesitant to engage with you because I don't know who you are yet. And so with that, then comes the perceived notion of what we've been taught about people who are different from us. That then we have to break through that barrier too as well. So if they do look different, talk different, act different, dress different, but they talk, act, and dress in a certain way that we were taught to basically put people like that in a box, then we kind of go in with this implicit bias. That's like, oh, well, you look like this, you talk like this, you dress like this, so you must be this one way. And we don't give that person an opportunity to teach us who they are. We go in as if we already know who they are. And we just we have a formed opinion already. And they cannot tell us anything differently because we already know. And just that very thing of allowing a person to have the opportunity to teach me who they are, to help me understand why they believe in what they believe in. Because with that, I grow. I grow because I'm challenged. And I believe, we only truly grow when there's a bit of friction that requires us to think again about what we believe in, why we believe in it, who we are, our place in the world, our legacy we want to leave. Like when we're forced to rethink that, then it helps us structure ourselves. And then we keep on this road of becoming,
Mm.
this road of becoming who it is that we are to be while we're here.
I mean, I want to talk more about this idea of friction. We
Yeah.
have voiced for the listeners that you're involved in politics. There might be some friction that happens there. I think his name is Timothy Clark, and he is a researcher in the area of psychological safety. And he talks about the idea of decreasing social friction while increasing intellectual friction. I'm wondering if, when you think about the rooms you've been in, when you've been lobbying and working in policy, where have you seen actions that we can take or mindsets we can put on if we're people who want to be open-minded and continuing to grow ourselves and continuing to look at our own bias, and we're in that place, let's say. How have you seen in those rooms that actually play out in a positive way when either you've taken that on or you've seen somebody model that?
I'll use myself as an example since I'm talking about my experiences. I remember it was in 2019. I was a federal negotiator for the Department of Education for a negotiated rulemaking. And it was my first time having such responsibility in a role. And of course, I was very honored and grateful. And I will say that I lead my life with gratitude. I really do. Every day, I'm thankful to have another day, that I can truly be better than I was the day before, that I can make informed decisions based on experiences that I have had that I've been able to learn from. While serving as a federal negotiator, I was on this committee of people who were very different, and we had to agree to language in federal regulations of how we wanted to change certain language that was within our subcommittee that we had, faith related language. Everyone had an opinion on this. And it was a diverse group of people, including one person with they them pronouns, they them theirs pronouns. And it was the first time that I had interacted with a person with they them theirs pronouns, but it was a wonderful learning experience for me because that was a growing opportunity for me. But as I think about myself and the ability to kind of engage with a diverse group of people and think about that intellectual friction, increasing that intellectual friction, decreasing that social friction, well, the social friction aspect was decreased because it was like, well, I'm going to embrace and accept and lean in to everyone here that's different from me. And I'm not going to just lead with my implicit bias and then have that block my ability to hear what it is they're saying and to actually want to work with them to come to a solution. I'm going to set that aside for a moment and I'm going to lean in with my intellectual curiosity and allow for that to be stimulated. But even within that group, I honestly, once again, thought, well, why am I even here? These people are so smart. They're lawyers, they're doctors, they've been in their careers for years, they're renowned, they're esteemed. I am, I was in my 30s, but I am still early in my career and there's still so much for me to learn. And I'm not a doctor of anything and I don't have a level of experience that they have or the gravitas that these people have. So, what good am I going to bring to this table? Well, I will say that throughout that experience, I realized that everybody comes to the table with strengths and weaknesses. And it doesn't matter your experiences per se, in the sense of, are you qualified? Are you good enough? If you are in a room, you have something that you can offer. It does not matter how old you are. It doesn't matter how long you've worked in the workforce. If you are a living, breathing human being in this world who's lived a life and who's had experiences and who's had to learn from those experiences, you have something unique and special that you can teach somebody else. Because 9 times out of 10, we have not had the same lived experience. So there's something differently that we're learning, right? To make a long story short, where my strength came in was I ended up being the one that was the consensus builder. Because lo and behold, other people around the table weren't very strong at that. They were very strong at, here's my academic expertise. I know this law back in, backwards and forwards, and I'm bringing this linear perspective to you. And you better listen to me. I am Dr. So and so and whatever. But no one was really thinking about, but how do we come together as one? What does that look like? Because if we are here, and I'm going to go into politics a little bit, but if we are here to serve the American people and we are here to serve this great nation, then we are going to come to it with a different set of views and perspectives. That's what makes our country great and beautiful. We all migrated here, except for those that were already here before, you know, the Native Americans that were here before with the land that they had that we colonized. However, we are the diversity of this nation, and diversity means so many different things, not just talking about race, but just lived experience and diversity of thought and perspective and all of those sorts of things has made this country very beautiful. And so being able to look and value that and say, okay, you're saying this over here, and you're saying something completely different over there. But what is the common link that we can all agree to? And so that's where I had found my strength. And I was able to utilize the basic skills of, okay, let me listen to what it is you're saying. And do I agree with what you're saying? Personally, no. I personally don't agree with that, actually. But just because I don't agree with you doesn't mean I can't have a conversation with you. It doesn't mean that there's not something I can learn from you that can better me as I continue to refine what it is I believe in, and as I continue to refine the messaging and how I message that to you. Because half the battle is the tone and delivery of how you communicate with someone. It's when that person walks away from you, how do they feel? You can have a disagreement. You can be on completely different sides of the table, but you can walk away feeling like you've been heard, feeling like that's a person I want to talk to again, actually, because that person is willing to engage me in move a dialogue forward instead of keeping it at a standstill.
One of the ongoing maybe themes or strengths that's within that consensus building is this ability to, when you were describing the doctor that's thinking very linearly, but this, I heard in you, the connections and bringing together and being able to think in flexible ways. And so it seems like when, like, if you turn on the news or you turn on certain forms of social media and things like that, you see, and we know the algorithm starts to define us and try to put us into a box to think in a certain way. And so I see kind of the opposite of that as, where can we intentionally make connections? Where can we intentionally seek out that friction that you're talking about? Where can we intentionally, if assuming again the parameter that we want to think in new ways, we want to continue to grow, we're not satisfied with what we think now as the end all be all. For those that are thinking in that way, they're probably not listening to this anyway. But if we want, or recognizing, I see this idea of making connections and thinking flexibly. What do you think about that?
Well, the first thing that comes to mind is I want to make sure that we don't get into the business of shaming other people for the choices they make. Okay? We shouldn't do that, in my opinion. We are all different for a reason, and we all have the ability to choose what we believe is best for us. Absolutely. And there are people that are intellectually curious, and I think that's wonderful and great. I am one of them. But just because someone may not be doesn't make me any better than them.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't make them any better than me. We're just simply different.
Mm-hmm.
There is, in my opinion, no right or wrong per se. Of course, there are criminal things that you can do. You're going to be locked in jail for that. So clearly, that's wrong. That's not what I'm talking
Yeah.
about. I'm talking about a person who just exists in this world that may choose to live in a small town their entire life, never travel to any other town their entire life, and never choose to engage with anyone that's different from them their entire life. Well, that's the choice they made because they feel safe.
Mhm.
And when we think about just the base, we all desire to feel safe where we are, right? We want there to be a safe environment, a safe space, someone that we can connect with. But that goes back to connection.
Yeah.
When you are connecting with someone, connection, you could define it as, well, I'm just simply having a conversation like you and I are having a conversation. So we're connecting. But connection can also go deeper to, well, I'm connecting with someone who's like minded, who understands me. And I feel like I can be myself with them. And I feel like with them, there's a safe space that I can exist. And there's a space that's held for me, tailor made for me, which is why oftentimes, me being a man of faith, my faith becomes so important to me, because in my faith, there is a space that's tailor made and set aside for me to live and exist and be exactly who I am and be loved for exactly who I am. I don't have to fight. I don't have to do 10,000 backflips to be seen as good enough. I can just exist on my worst day when I'm not dotting my I's and when I'm not crossing my T's, and still be loved the same,
Mm.
unconditional. And that's a beautiful thing to have, which is why I'm very thankful for my family who's instilled faith in my life, because that has stayed with me and will carry me through everything that it is that I will go through in my life. But going back to people who may choose to not be intellectually
Mhm.
curious or stimulated, on both sides, we have to make sure we do a better job and be more intentional about not shaming. When you don't lead with, I'm going to judge you before you're different, but you lead with, I'm going to open my heart up to you because you're different. I'm going to seek to understand because you're different. It completely changes the dynamic and energy in the room and ability to move forward and do something positive. So in my lines of work, when I'm with different people all the time, because I'm always with someone who's challenging me politically, on my views, who don't agree with my stance, don't agree with certain policy solutions that I may have. I'm constantly having conversations with people who are challenging me in that. But for me, I'm always, you know, intellectually stimulated by those conversations. And in having those conversations, I'll walk away with, oh, they actually had a good point. I do need to rethink this a little bit more. They were right about this. Oh, I didn't see this. I did not see it from this angle. Now I know how to have a rebuttal to that response to me if someone else had the same response. I am enlightened. I'm able to see this more holistically now. And so all of those things I personally have found to be valuable, but in the rooms and spaces where you're trying to move the ball forward. And with moving the ball forward, I firmly believe in taking a step forward to better this country and to do something positive for the American people is better than remaining stagnant and just fighting each other. And there is no forward movement at all.
I want to talk about what you think when you think about this moment in time and you think about the students that are served by higher education or could be served by higher education. What's the future of higher education from your point of view?
Right now, when it comes to lawmakers, there's definitely an increased sense on oversight and the need to better understand what's happening on college campuses, a need to better understand why our student loan debt levels are increasing significantly, and a need to better understand why college costs are increasing. And so, lawmakers have every right to have those questions and have every right to ask those questions. And again, going back to the importance of dialogue, the importance of leaning in and seeking to understand, then those conversations, again, going into a conversation where you're actually seeking to understand and gain more intel and knowledge to figure out what is the best solution, then that comes with ideally working together to figure that out. Because if you if you know that there's a problem and then you try to address the problem without talking to what you believe the problem is or who's causing the problem, because in your mind you just feel like you already know the answer to the problem, then oftentimes there are unintended consequences that occur when you have a thought, an idea, because you didn't really truly engage that person who is the problem or causing the problem. And so in my role, I try to make sure that intended outcomes are realized and unintended outcomes are averted.
Mhm.
Uh, and the only way to really do that is to try to create a space for lawmakers and stakeholders, and in this case, stakeholders being institutions of higher education, to have dialogue
Mhm.
and to ideally work together. There will be times when you're just at a disagreement and you just do not see eye to eye, and that is okay. And that happens. But just because you may believe, well, we're just never going to see eye to eye anyway, so why? So what's the point? Well, therein lies the issue, in my opinion. It's when you go ahead and make your mind up of what a person, how they're going to respond to you, or what they're going to think, or how they're going to feel. And so you just feel like there's no point in even engaging them. And it's like, well, wait a minute. You don't know if maybe that engagement could change the trajectory of what it is you're doing. And at the very least, why not try?
And it seems to me that from a being a like not being directly in policy, that we penalize lawmakers or elected officials for changing their mind on something. We call it flip-flopping. We say, you always said this and now you think this. We almost, externally see it as a negative, or at least it can be played that way.
Yes, it can definitely be played that way. For example, if we think about the presidential election that took place, there were 77,303,569 votes of the popular vote that voted Republican. And there were 75,009,233 votes for Democrats. And if you look at the popular vote, that's not necessarily very far away, a little over 77 million versus a little over 75 million. And so, with it being close in that way with the popular vote there are parts of the country, and even I just would say in all of us as a whole, some of us just have a predisposition to believe that never changing is the right thing. Just we're just pre there's just a predisposition to do that. And if you change, that's wrong, that's bad, never change, stay the same. Now that can be seen as a positive, and I will say that there are people that you meet in this life that are so wonderful, so pure, authentic, transparent, genuine. They have a heart where they for service. They really do care about people. They want to better people's lives. I would say, yeah, don't change. Stay the same, always stay that way.
Yeah.
We need people to stay that way. It's not a bad thing to be unmovable, unshakable, but I would say it depends on what is anchoring you to not move. If the anchor to not move is something that is, for the lack of a better term, ugly, in the sense that if what's anchoring you is hate, if what's anchoring you is anger, malice, cruelty, things that are
Here.
just fear ultimately, then I would say, well, let's better understand the why behind the what. Instead of me just saying, well, that person's a bad person and I'm going to say all these negative things about that person because they're angry. I want to understand why. What happened?
Yeah.
What happened? Because you're responding to something, and maybe you don't even really know that because you haven't gotten the therapy you need because the stigma on therapy, because there's a stigma
Everybody
depending on
needs
where
to
you
do
are.
therapy. If that's your takeaway,
Right.
please, will more people do the work? I did 4 years of therapy, and you can tell when somebody has not done their work. It is
It's
key.
key.
Something that you were saying there made me think about one of the ways I personally think about my mind changing on something is, and part of this was last semester I got to teach a university class for one of my clients, and the class was called How to Design Your Life: A Personal Journey of Epistemology. And so epistemology is the study of like our beliefs, why we believe what we believe. So I spent a whole semester with our students really thinking about how do we hold what we believe and think kind of at arm's length just for a moment. Like you may bring it right back in and it might be exactly what you still walk away with, but how do we just hold it at arm's length for a moment and look at it and think
Mm,
about why do we think that? Where
mm,
did that come from? What are the stories we tell ourselves? Whose voice is in our mind that said that? And again, it might be, and we left it up to our students to say, you might take that with you and carry it out. We just want to give you a moment to say, to challenge it if it's something that doesn't serve you. If it's a belief, when you were talking about these this other students that wanted you to run for president at Texas A&M, but you didn't yet believe in yourself, right? Like what if in that moment somebody could come in and change whatever that story was then, right? And of course it played out very nicely for you, but just these moments in time where something that we're holding, I think that I see this a lot with my other like women friends that are in the business world and are saying, well, I can't ask for that much, or I can't go for that position, or this or that. And a piece of it for them is sometimes we call it imposter syndrome, or but there's some story that they've told themselves that they can't ask for what they really are worth or what they could bring to the table. And so I think that this idea of just holding our thoughts, our beliefs, our ideas at arm's length just gives us a moment to not be afraid that it might change, but to really sometimes when I've done this, it's made something deeper that and for me, my faith is a piece of that. Understanding and not growing up in my current faith practice, but a different faith practice brought me to my faith in what I think is a deeper way because I wrestled with it intellectually. I wrestled with it in all sorts of different capacities before it became mine. And so anyway, I was just thinking about that. I don't know if that resonates.
it 1,000% resonates because I teach class as well, and I love my students. Every week that I can spend time with them, that moment is always the highlight of my week. And the reason why, and my students know this because I tell them, and the reason why it's a highlight for me is because I get a chance to see the world the way they see it. I get a chance to be reminded of what it was like when I viewed the world with rose-colored glasses on and believed in just all the biggest things and, just before the world happened to me.
Yeah.
And it encourages me and inspires me when I'm reminded that, oh, okay, there's still good here. There's still things that I can do. There's still, places I can go. But the difference is now that the world has happened to me, the placement of choice, agency has become so much more important and valuable because it's when you know that something could go, sideways or not the way you would have hoped, but yet you still choose to move toward your hopes and dreams anyway. And you choose when you have the narrative playing in your mind that you're not good enough. There's a motto in my class that I tell all of my students, and it goes like this. I am an A. No, no. We start off with I am smart. I am intelligent. I am an A plus student, and I can do anything I put my mind to. Four simple affirmations that end up being so powerful throughout the semester. And a part of me being a professor for them is not only making sure that they are grasping the academics, but it's me making sure that I'm nurturing them as a whole person. So in my class, we do highs and lows. I want to hear what are these highs and lows? Tell me, we all go around, we talk, we share, but it helps give me a better idea of, oh, okay, I know that this person, because they had this happen, I'm going to have to be a little bit more mindful of this assignment coming up and make sure I'm, how I individually cater the way I teach to my students because, they all don't learn the same. But the four affirmations that I have, and that's our motto for our class, helps that self narrative, that narrative that begins to be developed at birth, just the way you hear your mom and dad talk about things, the friends that you meet at school and the way they talk about things, just people that you adore, people that you admire, people that you respect. Those are the people that you kind of allow into your psyche. And even those people that you don't respect that find a way to disrupt, your disruptors of the world. And they come in, and disruption can be positive too. I'm not meaning, I don't want to say it in a way that it's just only a negative connotation. Disruption can definitely be positive. But for this example, I do mean it in the sense of someone who disrupts, interjects themselves into your life, and then plants a seed that is not edifying, plants a seed that is not empowering, plants a seed that is not affirming. But that seed being something that tears you down, that minimizes you, that makes you feel small, invisible, unseen, unheard, and ultimately unloved. Unfortunately, oftentimes it's those seeds that end up somehow growing at a faster rate. Whatever sprouts from that seed seems to sprout a bit faster and shades all the wonderful positive things that are also trying to grow. And because that one seed and what's sprouting is shading the other things that's trying to grow, that blocking of the sunlight impacts the growth. And we can't have that happen. We have to figure out a way to go back in time in our minds and undo, the very things that, or those seeds that were planted that were not saying, wait a minute, I can, but I can though. And if I don't believe in myself that I can, then how can I expect somebody else to do that with the same level that I can,
Mm,
that I need?
right.
And then that leads me to us loving who we are, accepting who we are, embracing who we are, but at the same time being willing to challenge who we are to grow to be better versions of who we are.
Mm. I love that two things can be true at the same time. We can love and have acceptance for ourselves and want more. And I think I've wrestled with this a lot because I love growth, obviously, and learning and reading and all of that growth. And then there's this message of, which is an important message, but I can think about it in different ways of not being entranced by the hustle culture of just do more, more, more. That's one of those things that I like to hold at arm's length to say, well, I think there's good in wanting to do more in terms of growth and making impact. However, pausing to say, what is the goal here? What am I after? Am I waiting for happiness in some sort of future version of myself rather than accepting where I am now? And so I think that where I've come to personally on this concept is this idea of two things being true at the same time, the acceptance and love and being present in the moment and having gratitude for the day, as you mentioned, and saying, we also got a lot of problems here. And there's some things that we need some smart people to work on fixing. And I want to be a part of that solution. And I want to support my clients and the students I work with and, wherever it is to move things forward. And that does require some hustle. And that does require some ongoing learning and growth. And so, where do you see potential right now in people and systems in the future of learning? Where do you have hope for the possibility of potential right now?
My glass is half full. That's kind of how I see it. And so that's the perspective that I generally come from. And in times such as these, there's a lot of talk about what's happening politically because it's just everywhere you go, and people are very involved in politics, I want to say, to a different sort of level because of the changes that we're seeing and things of that nature. I think times like these are times that kind of force us in some ways to talk and to have discourse. And maybe that is talking to like minded individuals who are just going to reaffirm your own positionings and not challenge you or push back on you at all. But I would like to say that it provides an opportunity for people to share words with other people who may view differently. Now, the reason why I say share words is because we all will choose how we want to share those words. And some people will choose to share attacking words, fighting words, you know, versus loving words. But some will say that to be able to talk, even though you're going to disagree with what you're saying, is a step forward to hopefully having another conversation that can maybe lead to a better and different outcome. But you got to start somewhere. So sometimes you start just miles apart, and it's just like, I don't know why you think this. I don't agree with you at all. But then maybe that initial engagement could lead to another type of engagement, maybe with a different individual, but the same topic. And then maybe that leads to something else. And there's like a snowball effect into, well, wait a minute, okay. I still don't agree with you, but I see where you maybe have a point. Like, I don't agree with you, but I can see why you may really think that based on your lived experiences. And that's interesting to me. And it makes me think a little bit differently about whatever this thing is that we're arguing over, you know? So I feel like right now we're kind of in, depending on where you live too, because as you mentioned earlier, some people you can just kind of just block it all out and just kind of live in your own little place of serenity and just don't turn on the news, don't listen to it, just kind of live your life and stay in your own little bubble. But for others, we are put in a pressure cooker and we are forced to really dig deep real quick, real fast because things are moving at record speed, lightning speed. And we got to figure this out now because the time is now. So, with change, it's the one constant in the world. And so, when change happens, then I think of it as okay, here's an opportunity, especially when I think of politics. When change happens in politics, so for example, a new administration comes in, there's an opportunity to have a new first impression. There's an opportunity to develop new relationships and to try again. Maybe with the last administration, your initial approach didn't work and you didn't get the outcomes you hoped for. But now you can try a different strategy and we can maybe take a different tone. Maybe we can use some different stats. Just figure out ways to better advocate, to better communicate. And that's something that can be applied to just life. Going through K through 12 college, every single teacher you meet, every class you take, every, internship experience you have, every new job you have, when you move to different places, you have an opportunity to have a different first impression. Your identity doesn't have to be what was. Your identity can be what you choose for it to be here and now. And oftentimes we keep ourselves stuck in the past, who we used to be, where we used to go, what we used to wear, who we used to hang out with. And we think that that's who we are. And we can't be any different. When really every day you wake up, you have the ability to choose. Your day is filled with thousands of choices that you make. And you have agency to make different ones. And it's empowering people to know that the battle is in your mind and it starts in your mind. That narrative, going back to that previous conversation about the narrative you play in your head. Does your narrative say, I can't? Or does your narrative say, I can? Because then the energy is going to quickly shift depending on the base of what it is that's playing in your mind.
Love that, Emmanuel. Okay, a sentence stem for you. The world needs more people who.
The world needs more people who are willing to actively listen.
Emmanuel, thank you so much for your time and for just making space to invite us into this conversation together. I really appreciate it. It's been so fun to be reconnected, and I'm excited to stay connected now in the work that you're doing. So thank you.
Thank you, Tracy.
If this episode reminded you of the power of listening, the gift of perspective, or the quiet strength in choosing growth over certainty, you're not alone. Huge thanks to Emmanual Guillory for his wisdom, warmth, and the vulnerability he brought to this conversation. Let's keep building thinkers, and more importantly, let's keep building bridges. Until next time.